with Mike Rotundo and Rick Steiner and Kevin Sullivan. What did you think of the decision to turn him heel and have him join the varsity club?
A fresh coat of paint, so to speak, new presentation. The varsity club is one of my favorite factions of all time. Kevin Sullivan kind of stepped away from his devil worship image. Complete work, by the way, for the former choir boy, Kevin Sullivan. He did a good job of herding the chickens there, so to speak. But, you look at the three talents. Rotunda was a great two-sport star in college, great amateur. Doc, four-time All-American in wrestling, played in 4 bowl games, captain of the OU football team, all that good stuff. And then, of course, Steiner was a freak, amateur at Michigan, heavyweight, tougher than hell. So people believed that the varsity club were the real item. And by the way, they were. One of my favorite factions. I think we could have got a lot more mileage out of that than we did, but it just speaks to the unorganization, the lack of communication in WCW at that time. Didn't do Doc any favors, or any of those guys any favors. They had a good thing going. I thought the varsity club was one of our best creations in WCW.
Were you excited to see some Chinese pro wrestling when AEW announced that they would be featuring Chinese wrestlers on their program? Well, you can watch Chinese pro wrestling right now by checking out Middle Kingdom Wrestling. That's MKW. MKW is the top pro wrestling organization in China today. It's a unique pro wrestling company with Chinese characteristics. It features one of the most internationally diverse rosters in wrestling today from nearly 30 countries so far. MKW has showcased, developed, and promoted wrestling in other countries like Nepal, Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea, with a more particular focus on countries that are a part of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. MKW live broadcasts in China consistently attract millions of fans, even often reaching 10 million concurrent viewers. Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, MKW was on track to host the first ever all-women's wrestling tournament in China, and they were also planning a Malaysian wrestling tour in the first half of 2020. These plans are still intact once it's safe to return again. MKW prides itself on cultivating the development of pro wrestling in China and in countries where wrestling is still underdeveloped or not quite widely known yet. By joining the MKW fan community, you too are helping pro wrestling develop around the world. Find out more at MiddleKingdomWrestling.com or just look for Middle Kingdom Wrestling on YouTube or Facebook. It's also MKW China on Instagram and MKW Wrestling on Twitter. And we thank them for sponsoring the podcast. We get a new look for Steve here too. Now that he's a heel, he's going to get a haircut, going to wear a singlet that says Oklahoma in it. And let's fast forward to Starrcade 88. Steve and Kevin Sullivan would defeat the Fantastics to win the United States Tag Team titles. Sullivan, sort of the leader / manager of the group. How do you think he fit in this role? I mean, we've got so many other amateur wrestlers and he's sort of the taskmaster of it all.
Yeah. Kevin was not the coach, the old offensive line coach, the defensive coordinator type guy, the experienced guy. And again, just from a persona, present and a presentation standpoint, I think Sully was very, very good for the varsity club. He gave him some leadership, some stability. And Sully also saw, because he had a very good eye for talent, that they were on to something. They certainly were on to something. So Kevin did a nice job in that role because it was a departure from, his previous incarnations creatively. His TV persona changed. To this role. He did a good job, quite frankly. And again, the satanic gimmick was kind of passe and all that crap. So. It was good. Kevin did a good job. He was the right man for that role. I really believe.
Let's talk a little bit about, what he's doing after he gets into the new year in 1989. We see Steve and Kevin lose these tag team titles, the United States Championship titles, to, Eddie Gilbert and a former varsity club member himself, Rick Steiner. That happens on February 28th. And right after that, Steve starts teaming with Mike Rotundo. They have a ton of matches with the world tag champs at the time, the Road Warriors, on house shows. And we even recently covered the Clash of the Champions 6, where Mike and Steve would beat the Road Warriors to win the tag titles. But of course we know they're going to be stripped after they attack the guest referee, Nikita Koloff. And not too terribly long after this, the varsity club is disbanded and Dr. Death is now back as a babyface. Why don't you think Varsity Club had more legs?
They did have more legs. It was politics, and indecisiveness, using not a lot of logic on flipping these personas. You know, the most powerful weapon in wrestling is not Dr. Death's Oklahoma Stampede, the running power slam. It's called the eraser. And it was just thought that Doc was going to be a better babyface than a heel, I guess. I just thought it was poor judgment in hindsight. It's easy to say after the fact, all these things are. But I thought that the Varsity Club had a lot more longevity, a lot more legs. They were the thing about the Doc with Rotunda, for example. They were not only great brawlers, but they were more importantly, they were great wrestling heels. They could actually wrestle, and that gets a lot of heat on a babyface when on the crowd rather with a babyface when you're beating them and you're laughing about it or you're gloating about it. It's that old psychology works every time. And but I thought that we disbanded the Varsity Club much too soon.
No doubt about it. At this point, do you think Doc preferred tag team wrestling? I mean, he's been in the tag team for much of his run here in the NWA. Did the NWA not see him as a single star, or what can you tell me about what his preference was?
I think Doc's inability to do a great promo hurt him, and the perception of his skill set was not accurate. You know, here's the deal, and how easily that's solved. Can you imagine Dr. Death being the heel champion with Jim Cornette as his manager?
Oh my God.
How simple is that to fix?
Yeah.
But then you got to placate so many people in the booking committee, and everybody's got a dog in the hunt, and they got their buddy they want to help out. And I promise it's got a little push, blah, blah, blah. So it was just, and Doc was not a real political guy. He didn't lobby hard enough maybe for himself. Maybe he didn't squeak loud enough to get greased. But point being is that there was a concern that if you're going to be the champion, you got to be able to cut promos, because remember in that era who the champion was and how well he could talk. His name was Ric Flair. And that's not fair to compare anybody to Ric Flair. If you do, then everybody's going to fall short. So, but I think Doc had rather have been a single. There's more money in the singles. It's kind of like the videos that we showed, we've been seeing on AEW with Scorpio Sky. He's been in a tag team forever. I said this on one of our post-game shows. You're going to make more money as a single than you are as a tag. And so I said, you know, what is Scorpio Sky in with his team? Are you playing the role of Buddy Roberts? I mean, what are you doing here? So you split a payoff three ways in a tag match in a six-man type scenario with three guys on a unit. It lessens the payoff, their payoff, because there's only going to be so much money allocated for that match. And then if you got to slice that pie up in more slices, guess what? The slices are smaller, and you didn't maximize your minutes, quite frankly. So I think Doc wanted to be a single because the guys he idolized, like Cowboy Bill Watts, Ted DiBiase, so forth and so on, they were guys that made money in the tags. Watts started out in New York as Bruno Sammartino's tag team partner. That's how he got noticed, thanks to Wild Red Barry, who got him the job. So, Steve knew all that legacy and all those stories. He'd heard them all. So I think he'd rather have been a single because, again, Steve was more motivated, which should come as no surprise, by the money than the fame. So, but I do believe that we missed the boat on him. Again, putting him with a guy like Cornette would have been magic, because then he's always got the guy out there, the out. You got a guy that can do the promos. You know, it's like Cornette when he managed Vader.
Right. Exact same.
Same deal. And he was just brilliant at it. And he knew how to position his talent. And so we didn't ever get that far. It was funny about the Midnight Express situation there in WCW anyway. The Midnight Express were the greatest heel teams of all time, without question. They weren't in great favor with Jim Herd, obviously. And nobody understood that logic. Tell me why. And, of course, the answer, well, they've been around too long, and people are tired of seeing them. Well, where do you get that at? You're tired of seeing them. That's all. And it ain't about you because you're going to watch anyway. And so to take a team like the Midnight Express and de-emphasize them was silly. And then not utilizing Steve Dr. Death Williams, who's right in your face, a young, big, strong, athletic son of a gun. It just was illogical. And I think Doc had figured that too. What am I doing wrong? Really, you're not doing anything wrong. But your deficiency, the one deficiency that we perceive that you have, can be remedied with a manager, a good manager. And we had the best manager in the business at that time, who I guarantee you Cornette would have been more than happy to help Doc, without a doubt. And that would have been nothing but money.
Well, unfortunately, that's not on the docket, but he was supposed to face Lex Luger for the United States Championship at Wrestle War 1990 on February 25th. However, as you may recall, Sting, who was supposed to wrestle Ric Flair for the world title that same night, suffers a knee injury. So they have Luger turn babyface and move from the United States match up to the world title match in Sting's place. So somewhere in this area is when Steve says, okay, that's enough. He leaves the NWA, goes to All Japan Pro Wrestling. What leads to him making this decision here?
Create two things, two C's, cash and creative. For the time you invest in All Japan, he went from Inoki's New Japan and become a star there and had those countouts with Inoki, those battles that they had. So he was already quote unquote over in Japan. And Mr. Baba, being a very smart man, saw money and saw big money. So the offer for Doc to come in on his weekly was a significant increase in what he made for Inoki. And not that Inoki didn't pay him well, he did, but Baba just really, really wanted him to come back and work for All Japan, not New Japan. So I think money was the one idea, and the fact that in Japan the politics have lessened a little bit on how they perceive things and how they approach things still this very day. So I think this cash and creative motivated Doc to take the money, and when you look at it, even though you're doing all that travel, getting to Japan, et cetera, the point I'm making is that it's really not a full-time gig. So all of a sudden you're making a whole lot more money than you were making in the States on a full-time gig. And now you're making more money on a gig that doesn't require as much time. So you go work 2 or 3 weeks, you're back home for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is. So there's those extended off periods of time that you could be with family, you could heal, you could train. I know Doc bought I think at that time, somewhere in that era, he bought a condo in Maui. And so sometimes after his Japanese trip, he'd just fly back, shorter trip than flying back to Louisiana. He'd fly to Hawaii and stay there, which is not a bad place to do R&R. So he's making some pretty good decisions there. But I think that was just cash and creative, Conrad.
Talk to me a little bit about him teaming with Terry Gordy. While he's over here in Japan, Giant Baba decides to make these guys a team. They become known as the Miracle Violence Connection. They end up going down as one of the greatest tag teams in all of wrestling history there in Japan, and I guess the world over. I mean, they're totally dominating the division. They're beating teams like Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey, Jumbo Tsuruta and Kenta Kobashi, as well as Doug Furness and Dan Crofot, who we know as Phil LaFawn in the WWF. I mean, just one big name after another. I mean, you set them up, and Doc and Gordy knock them down, right?
Yeah, and Mr. Baba had great respect for those two guys and high expectations, and he knew how to get talent over. He, meaning Mr. Baba. You beat stars, and their philosophy was that it's a sporting event, and in a sporting event, it should be positioned that anybody can win and anybody can lose, and the finish is not obvious. So all those guys that you just mentioned, Conrad, those great teams that you talked about, they were all stars. They were all established and over. So Mr. Baba bringing in Doc and putting him with Terry Gordy was magic. And that really created a dynamic that we haven't really seen since that time. Two big 300-pound guys. And I'm not going crazy over size because these are athletic guys. People remember how athletic Terry Gordy was. He could drop kick. He could move around, and he was self-trained. He'd been in the business a long time by that time. still young, but he started as a teenager, 16 years old or something, 15 or 16. And then you had Doc with all his